Okay, um, this is a good one because I teach history, and that's a huge problem in history in the past. I don't know if any of you are history teachers, but yeah, that used to be a huge issue. Is that in history classes, once upon a time anyway, you might still see it. I know I've seen it in recent history classrooms. It was basically a textbook was authored, and then students were asked to just tell the teacher what the textbook said, basically. So you tell me how that's learning. But ultimately, this depends on what you teach. So, for instance, a PE teacher's assessment of praxis will be much different than an English or a history teacher's assessment of praxis. But in any case, your assessment of practical application should be able to definitively answer the question, has the student demonstrated the outcome? It needs to answer that. Since my teaching background is English and history, I can sort of speak from those. Like I said, in English, I found scaffolding to be a really effective way to assess practical applications, and it's mostly because practical applications in English are massive projects. It's crafting arguments and ideas, it's writing essays, it's defending positions, it's analyzing meaning, it's drawing connections. So if I can break those down into smaller components, I'm able to more accurately assess their practical application of the bigger picture. And therefore, they're receiving more feedback of each component of the practical application. So then when it comes to them actually demonstrating it for summative purposes, I already have a pretty good trail of formative assessment for me to inform my summative assessment. In history, I started implementing what's called historical thinking. Surely you've heard of this. If you haven't, I'm sure you will soon. Historical thinking elements became the practical foundation for what students were assessed from in my history class. So doing so meant that the practical application became students working through historical events by discovering them for themselves in a way. So instead of saying, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, the objective is a little more to research how those historical events bleed into one another. Cause and causation, effect, things like that, historical significance. So the assessment was way more rooted in research and exploration of history rather than some retelling of a textbook. But in both cases, I avoid the close-ended questionings, so the who, what, where, when, and I assess to the open-ended problem solving, the why and the how. But again, it depends on the outcome that you're assessing. And in general, I think that student choice is also hugely important to assessing praxis if you can manage it, because student choice just positions the student to be more comfortable with whatever they're learning and meeting that outcome. But like I said, if you're a PE teacher and you're assessing sending and receiving, it needs to look a certain way. It needs to be done a certain way. But in some other classes, there's a lot of flexibility as to how you do that practical application, but assess the open-ended things and use the close-ended things as a way to get to the open-ended assessment, if that makes sense.